Koreans versus Crips and Bloods, it's aliens versus the American people. The last part, I'm really trying hard to bring it back to architecture now. While the riots were happening, one of the most, most old world, most sophisticated, most intellectual critics of architecture that you can imagine, Sir Charles Jenks. He's a sir, he lives in London, he lives in England in a fantastically beautiful country mansion with his own designed park, etc. He's a Harvard and Cambridge educated literary theorist and an architect. And he's written one of the most important architecture books ever called The Language of Postmodern Architecture, and in the late 70s. And then in the early 90s, he decided to write a book about Los Angeles. And why did he want to write a book about Los Angeles? Because he said this is also the kinds of things that he did. He created a kind of flow charts that give every type of architectural style, every theory gives it its place in a kind of Darwinian evolution charts. And what he always talks about is that architecture is not about the one single moral truth of modernism, but architecture is about, should be, because modernism to him was the big mistake of architecture, and not so much in its effects on society, but much more in the thinking behind it, that modernism was always about one truth, while architecture should be a reflection of the incredible diversity and difference in the world. He says that difference is the most important driving force for, not just for nature, but also for culture. So he has always talked about architecture in a very philosophical, theoretical, but also nearly religious way as something that should reflect and come out of difference. Which is why in the early 90s he decided to write this book called Heteropolis, which for especially the community in West Hollywood was a kind of ironic statement. But so it's called Heteropolis, Los Angeles. Its first title was The Strange Beauty of Hetero Architecture. Hetero, of course, meaning other, that things are about the other, not about homo is the same, hetero is the other, as you all understand. But then the riots happened, and he was halfway writing his book. So he called it The Riots and the Strange Beauty of Hetero Architecture. What he talks about, he also, by the way, was partly educated by Rayner Banham when he was studying in Cambridge. He also has an epiphany driving his car through the streets of Los Angeles. His epiphany is that he's parked his car for a traffic light, and then he hears a soft thud on the back bench, and then he sees it's an avocado that's fallen from the tree into his car. And then he thinks two things. He thinks it's like being in one of those, you know, those paintings of the Land of Plenty, you know, where fried chicken fly through the, fly around and fresh fruit falls into your mouth and wine comes running down streams, etc. One of those medieval fantasy lands of plenty. But also, he realizes that the avocado does not come from Los Angeles. It comes from, I think it comes from, I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from the Mediterranean. And then he realizes that none of the plants that he sees around him come from Los Angeles. Because Los Angeles was basically kind of brush. And everything is imported. And everything comes from somewhere else. And this has created a kind of heterogeneity, a kind of diversity, a kind of biological multi-ethnicity that is completely unique in the world, because the city does not derive its identity and its power and its content from a kind of original essential source or an essential identity. It derives its its identity and its force from difference, from things coming together from completely different backgrounds and creating this incredible richness and this incredible diversity that you can never catch in one frame. And then he talks about how this architecture also, that also this city has therefore produced also an architecture of difference. And of course the cover is the Chiat Day offices in Venice Beach in Los Angeles by Frank Gehry, where in one facade he joins together three completely different formal and architectural languages, like a modernist and pop art, and I don't know what the style on the right would be called, I hope. Charles Jenks does, but I forgot. Then he shows how, for example, there you see West Hollywood is called Gay Town, which is just one of the hundreds of identities that you can find in this city. He picks apart, he excavates this city as a patchwork of differences in an extremely optimistic and extremely beautiful way. Watts is the black culture, and Culver City is where the movie industry starts, and the barrio to the right of downtown, and Koreatown, and Little Guatemala, etc., etc., etc. So the city is, you cannot catch it in one word. It's one big multicultural dreamscape. Now, and then he finds a new generation of architects also in Los Angeles. People like Tom Main of Morphosis, Eric Owen Moss, Brian Murphy, Frank Gehry. This, for example, are Eric Owen Moss designs for buildings in Culver City that not only on a programmatic scale, because they mix leisure and work and living with each other, but also in the architecture itself. It's all about taking forms that once were whole and then pushing them into each other and then picking them apart and making kind of new, contradictory, strange, labyrinthine, Escher-like compositions out of them. So it is the difference of this architecture that produces its aesthetics and its forms. But also things like the Journey Partnership, the biggest designer of shopping malls in the world. They also designed, for example, the inner linings or the interior of the Koopgoot in Rotterdam. And the Universal City Walk, which is a kind of reproduction of all the